speaks volumes as to the reason that Michelle and I so deeply want to participate in this venture. We are honorary co-chairs. We're not leading the venture. I think it's important for people to recognize that. That will be led by a very distinguished board gradually being gathered. But we want to be an intimate part of the evolution of JRAN and the work that it does. And I don't think anything could be put more eloquently or movingly than the rabbi has put it, even though he was prompted of Pavlovian necessity to start with a story. I would love to start with a similar story, but all I know about buses is that I could sing for you the wheels of the bus go round and round. And I am a failed politician, emeritus, rather than an emeritus of other standing. Michelle and I deeply share the rabbi's sentiments and views, and she will speak to it more feelingly than can I. But I have a number of things I'd like very, very briefly to say that flow from this remarkably flawed piece of legislation which was introduced in the House of Commons, to which the rabbi referred. And I guess there are 5 things I would like to say. Number one, it's totally outrageous that designated countries like Hungary, Mexico, Hungary in particular, receive the designation on the basis of statistics compiled by the Immigration and Refugee Board, which statistics are often suspect, and then given to the ministerial discretion which Jason Kenney then exercises. I have rarely heard of anything so flawed in dealing with the tremendous vulnerability of human beings. And it is profoundly wrong ever to have a designated country system in place without having an expert panel on human rights that evaluates the state of human rights in the country to be designated. In all my years with the United Nations and looking at the international covenants and conventions which govern human rights behavior, I've never heard of making decisions around designated countries without having an expert human rights panel to assess the nature of the human rights in that country. And if the human rights in Hungary were so assessed, then everything the rabbi has said would be authenticated. The Roma has been singled out, of course, but in all cases you have ethnic groups, you have religious groups, you have LGBT groups, you have all kinds of vulnerable groups whose predicament and vulnerability should be assessed by a human rights tribunal appointed from civil society primarily, that could instruct a minister at the point of designation. Number 2, it's equally outrageous that deportation can occur before an appeal is heard. That is an absolute and obvious violation of international human rights law. It shows contempt for the rule of law. A government that believes in the rule of law doesn't behave that way. And yet that is the nature of the legislation, and it is deeply offensive. In fact, it's indefensible. Number 3, it's outrageous that health care should be denied refugees. Refugee country and origin, refugee status and origin of country should not determine health care coverage. We're a country which prides itself in health care being one of the defining characteristics of Canadians. In all of the various surveys that have been held of Canadians, what they cherish most or what most exemplifies Canada, interestingly enough, healthcare is almost always at the top of the list. And we're losing healthcare coverage. And what the doctors have done in standing up to the Ministry of Immigration is extremely important. But of course, what we're doing is that we're playing refugees off against the anxieties of Canadians. It's rancid political behavior. There's no other way to describe it. And in healthcare in particular, it's so offensive. All of us on this panel, I think, which is the 4th point I want to make, are here because we can't abide the willful political vilification of vulnerable groups. And that's what's happening around refugee status. And it has to come to an end. And the Jewish community, above all, given what we have experienced in the past, should be taking a lead in this in conjunction with Canadians from all backgrounds. And I would end this way. The report of the United Nations High Commission on Human Rights, which emerged in the last 48 hours, is deeply instructive. We now have 45 million refugees in the world, many millions of those internally displaced in countries like Syria and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Anyone who is fashioning refugee policy at this point in time in a country which pretends to be decent, empathetic, and civilized has to take into account the reality of increasing number of refugees seeking status in many countries over the next number of years. The patterns of sexual violence which are evident throughout the world are going to cause increasing numbers of women to seek status. The extraordinary consequences of climate change are going to mean many millions around the world of environmental refugees. And the inclination of numbers of countries from Africa to the Russian Federation being more and more punitive and authoritarian in their behavior will necessarily mean that people are seeking status elsewhere. They're not all going to come to Canada. A handful will seek entry to Canada. But keeping in mind the realities out there, the Canadian refugee system cannot be what it is now, punitive and destructive and insensitive. That has to change, and I'm very, very pleased, as I know Michelle will momentarily demonstrate, that we can be part of JRAD and bring to the attention of the Canadian public both the flaws and the injustices in the current